If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 61, Meeting Amelia Bones. September 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. For the next hour, Harry kept himself busy by going through the news articles. The articles gave a detailed picture of all what had transpired the previous night, which included Snape's arrest. Although it was not very obvious, but the article mentioned about a rift between the savior of the wizarding world and leader of the light, i.e. between Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore. As the 1 hour passed by, Harry walked back towards Professor McGonagall's office. Soon he arrived in her office, where she waiting for Harry's arrival. "Let us go, Mr. Potter," she said, and activated the Flow network. She stood beside Harry and muttered ministry. After which she and Harry disappeared from Minerva's office in green flames. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. The next moment Harry opened his eyes, he was greeted by the bustling sight of the Ministry's atrium. It was the first time at Ministry of Magic for Harry. As soon as Harry stepped forward, a lot of attention was drawn towards him. Few reporters were quick to capture few pictures, and the crowd started to act like in frenzy seeing Harry Potter. But before anything more could happen, there was a loud booming sound and 2 Aurors arrived and stood in front of Harry Potter. The arrival of the Aurors calmed the nerves of the crowd, and the excitement and anxiousness in the atmosphere reduced a bit. Kingsley Shacklebolt greeted, "Good morning, Professor McGonagall." "Good morning, Mr. Potter." Both of them greeted the Auror back. Kingsley said, "Mr. Potter, come with me. Madam Bones would like a word with you before the proceedings." Harry nodded and looked towards McGonagall, who asked, "I believe you won't have any problem in going alone, Mr. Potter?" Harry replied, "No, Professor." Minerva nodded her head, "Very well then. I will meet you at the time of proceedings." Harry gave a nod and walked behind Kingsley. After taking the famed lifts of the magic and arrived at the second floor, which housed the DMLE. Soon the duo reached a gate which had a nameplate containing Amelia Bones with DMLE head below it. Kingsley knocked the door and walked inside, followed by Harry. He said, "Madam Bones, Mr. Potter is with me." Amelia lifted her eyes from the pile of documents she was looking at. "Very well, Shacklebolt. You may leave now." Kingsley nodded his head, took his leave and went outside the office. "Good morning, Madam Bones," greeted Harry. "Morning, Mr. Potter," replied Amelia, and then added, "Take a seat." Harry walked forward and took one of the 2 chairs and sat opposite Amelia. Amelia began, "It is good that you decided to attend the proceedings, Mr. Potter." She continued, "The wizarding world have had zero contact with you in the past 14 years, but now you are suddenly all over the news, but for all the wrong reasons. What you did, you may consider right, Mr. Potter. But the wizarding world views things differently. Any act of violence, even if served for justice, is called dark. Any spell which the majority have limited understanding is termed dark. Any spell which can be performed only by powerful wizards or witches is termed dark. Any ritual or magical process can be termed dark." Harry nodded and wondered where Amelia was going with all this. Amelia gazed inquisitively at Harry and asked, "Tell me, Harry, why was it so easy for Voldemort to terrorize the whole of Wizarding Britain so easily?" Harry nodded and answered with clarity in the voice, "Because very few had the guts to oppose him." Amelia nodded and asked again, "And why did so few had the guts to oppose him, when he was almost hated by all?" Harry pondered over the answer, but Amelia did not wait for much and started, "Let me tell you something. When Voldemort began his rise, I had almost started my career as an intern Auror. Mr. Potter, when I had graduated from Hogwarts, I was at top in my class and was almost excellent in all kind of spells taught at Hogwarts. So, initially I was very much confident in myself." She sighed, "But then reality struck me. It was my first time when we encountered few Death Eaters. And then I saw the gap between the 2 groups. The Death Eaters launched all kind of fearsome and deadly spells against us. Even experienced Aurors were finding it hard to match against the Death Eaters." She continued with a displeased face, "And myself, the best Hogwarts had to offer knew what? A disarming spell and a shield charm. Add 1 or 2 more in the mix. Any other spell which could have useful in battle was unknown to me. It was only through sheer luck that I survived my first battle, Mr. Potter. That was the moment realization struck me. Only after that cruel experience, I looked for spells in my family library and armed myself with all kind of offensive spells." This time they stared at Harry. "Now you understand why so few had the guts to oppose Voldemort? Because they were only sheep in front of lions, and Voldemort was no ordinary lion." Harry nodded in understanding. Amelia continued, after my graduation the scope of education has only deteriorated further in Hogwarts. Her gaze intensified at Harry. Now Mr. Potter, I believe that you are not going on the dark path as claimed by Dumbledore, and hopefully you don't prove me wrong. She chuckled. I saw the state the 4 students were in memories of Miss McGonagall. And with all what you did to them, I am confident that even among the Aurors there are few who can take you on. She smiled. So, for the common public you are definitely the next Dark Lord. After all, if you turn evil, there are few who could oppose you. You understand what I am saying? Harry nodded his head in understanding. Outwardly he maintained a calm expression, but inwardly he was a bit surprised with all what he learned. For some time, he had been considering the majority of wizards and witches to be cowards, but he had never considered the fact that they had never been equipped to go against someone like Voldemort. Chapter 62, Proceedings, 1. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. The duo remained silent for the next few moments. Amelia broke the silence. Mr. Potter, I hope you would keep in mind all that I have told you. She added further, we definitely don't need another Dark Lord rising. My only advice is that you should always take into consideration what actions are you taking. Even if what you did is correct does not mean it is the best thing to do. Harry nodded, indicating he understood what the DMLE head wanted to say. She stood up. Let us go for proceedings of Severus Snape. Harry followed behind Amelia Bones, who began to describe what to expect from the proceedings. She began, Mr. Potter, I must inform you that Mr. Snape getting free without any punishment is almost a done deal. Not only is he being supported by all the factions led by Dumbledore, but even Lucius Malfoy had called in support for Mr. Snape. She further added, you might have had a chance relying on your reputation as the savior of the wizarding world, but your actions previous night has pushed many of the neutrals away from you. Harry nodded and silently walked behind Amelia Bones. For now he was silently wondering if he had made a mistake by being so brutal. Previously, he had thought that his action would have a deterring effect, but he had not considered the negative effect his action would have. He had so many other options to punish those people. If he would have wanted, no one would have ever known what happened to those 4 students, but he exposed himself intentionally. Amelia also did not speak any further, and they soon reached a large door. Amelia indicated towards another door. You can use that to reach the visitors' gallery, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Madam Bones, replied Harry. With a nod, Amelia pushed open the door and walked inside while Harry used the other door to get inside. After walking inside he took few stairs and reached the visitors' gallery. Few wooden benches were arranged in the gallery. The gallery was mostly empty with a very few seats occupied. These were mostly the press reporters. The moment Harry arrived inside the gallery, one particular witch reporter with blonde hair arranged in curls, was quick on her feet and approached Harry. Mr. Potter, good morning. To Harry the witch gave a vibe which asked him to stay at some distance away from her. He took a moment to look at the witch in front of him and tried to recall if he could recognize her. He nodded. Good morning, miss. The reporter let out a small laugh. Rita Skeeter. The reporter was about to say something more when the sound of the gavel hitting the wood from the courtroom attracted their attention. Harry then ignored the reporter and walked forward to arrive at the edge of the gallery. In the courtroom, the first thing Harry noticed was Dumbledore occupying the seat of Chief Warlock. Seated in front of him was Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic. Next to him was a toad-like woman dressed in pink clothes, whom Harry could not recognize. The court was not completely full, and Harry could recognize that most of them were from Lucius's faction or the Pureblood faction. But surprisingly, Lucius himself was not present in the courtroom. To Harry's surprise, Minerva McGonagall was also occupying her chair, and this led Harry to wonder that which side she would be voting. Amelia was standing in the open space below all the occupants. Next to her, sitting on a wooden chair, was Severus Snape. After banging his gavel few more times, Dumbledore said, Madam Bones, begin. Amelia nodded. The accused, Severus Snape. Mr. Harry Potter, Lord Apparent of most ancient and most noble house of Potter, accused Mr. Severus Snape of firing a bone-breaking curse on his head with the intention of killing him and ending his family line, declared Amelia. Dumbledore asked, Madam Bones, you will be acting as the prosecutor. Amelia nodded. Dumbledore then turned towards Snape. Severus, who will act as your defendant? Snape let out his trademark grin. I will defend myself. Very well. Severus, you may put up your case first, said Dumbledore. He asked Amelia, does the prosecutor agree? Amelia nodded in agreement. Snape stood up from his seat and let out an evil grin. I agree that I fired a bone-breaking curse at Mr. Potter. He continued without any break, but the condition demanded me to take such actions. We all know what Mr. Potter did to the 4 students. I was among the first few to arrive at the scene with other professors of Hogwarts. Following behind us were a large group of students which included students from all years. At the time Mr. Potter appeared to be a very dangerous prospect and had a very dangerous glint in his eyes. My instinctive reaction was as if he would fire few curses in our direction. Though, the professors would have been able to defend themselves but the students would have been helpless, especially, the first-year ones. It had not been a fortnight since they have started to learn magic. The bat continued, and you cannot fault me with the line of my thinking considering the condition of the 4 boys from my house were in. It was a brutal torture, nothing like a 4th year could do. The boy was like a man possessed. I sum up my defense by concluding that what I did was the best course of action I could have taken at the moment. Also, I would another important thing that at the last moment I had pulled back my spell which allowed Mr. Potter to dodge the spell. The council must also consider the fact that ultimately no harm was done to Mr. Potter and he remained unscathed, concluded Snape. After this conclusion he walked back and took his seat on the wooden chair. Chapter 63, Proceedings, 2. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. After Snape's conclusion, Dumbledore announced, "Now the prosecutor may begin." Amelia nodded and walked a bit closer to the members of the council. She started, "What Mr. Snape spoke is factually correct but the image presented by those facts have been twisted completely." She continued, "Let me begin and correct the presented picture one by one. Since Mr. Snape himself admitted about firing the curse I need not to call any witnesses but some things must be described. Along with Mr. Snape to arrive at the scene were many people but 2 of those must be named, one the retired Auror Alastair Moody and other the veteran witch and transfiguration mistress Minerva McGonagall. The point I am trying to make is that neither of the other professor including these 2 experienced veterans figured the possessed and the dangerous look of Mr. Potter but only Mr. Snape was able to figure that out." She grinned in Dumbledore's direction, "The thing which the council must keep in mind that Mr. Severus Snape is a professor of potions and not of any combat-related branches of magic so he has no experience regarding this matter. Even Chief Warlock and Headmaster would agree to my assessment of Snape being incompetent as he himself had rejected Mr. Snape's application for the post of Dada Professor numerous times despite Hogwarts not having a permanent Dada Professor for years." At this moment Harry noticed the small subtle smile Dumbledore had on his face vanished a bit. He smiled now, understanding this: even if Snape is going to get free today, Madam Bones is going to shred the bat into pieces. So, Mr. Snape's argument regarding this matter cannot be taken as he has stated and we must also consider other factors while looking at the case, declared Madam Bones. Now, the other point I must make out is that Mr. Snape did talk about how his instinct told him that Mr. Potter may fire curses in direction of the students is a blatant lie. Memory from any of the witness of the event can be extracted and looked upon. It would be clearly seen that when the professors arrived at the scene, Mr. Potter had his wand lowered and not in the direction of the students, said Amelia. Dumbledore interrupted at this moment, "Madam Bones, I as a chief warlock must remind you that memories are not admissible evidence in the Wizengamot." Amelia chuckled, "And neither are the words of Severus Snape. I believe we can call the professors of Hogwarts to ask the truth about this matter." Dumbledore immediately shook his head, "I believe that won't be necessary. You can present the rest of your case and if the need arises, we can summon them." Amelia did not pursue this matter and moved forward, "Very well. Now, we must talk about Mr. Snape's action. Even if we for a moment we assume that all what Mr. Snape told is true, how can he justify directly firing a bone-breaking curse at the head of Mr. Potter? Mr. Snape in ideal condition should have fired the disarmament spell. He could have fired a stunner instead to make Mr. Potter unconsciousness. But he fired a curse that could kill if it struck the head and this is exactly where he aimed. Not at the legs or arms but at the head, argued Amelia. Harry, inwardly let out a small praise for Madam Bones. Till now she had been brilliant in his opinion. None of Snape's reasoning could stand against Madam Bones' arguments. Madam Bones continued, "Now, I must also mention other important event. Mr. Snape had been very subtle in this regard so it is my duty to make it clear. The potions professors very subtly maligned the image of Mr. Potter as an evil fellow. He very clearly remarked about the brutality of Mr. Potter so as to create a negative image of Mr. Potter in the mind of the members of the Wizarding Council. Though this is unrelated to the current case, I must this on the table that those 4 students were caught attempting to assault a Miss Lovegood. Miss Lovegood is goddaughter of Lily Potter, mother of Harry Potter. Amelia Bones was about to continue to her argument further when a hem interrupted her flow. She tried to ignore the interruption and was about to continue when another hem interrupted her again. Meanwhile, Harry also caught the pink toad as the source of disturbance. On the other hand, Amelia sighed in annoyance and turned towards the pink toad. Undersecretary Umbridge, please at least learn to be civil. Learn when to interrupt, and if it is something important you must ask for permission. Maintain the decorum of the council. Harry looked at Undersecretary in amazement, as her mere presence was enough to annoy any person to no end. Dolores Umbridge turned in embarrassment on being schooled from Amelia Bones in front of the entire council. She was about to retort when, Minister of Magic, who had been quiet the entire time, spoke. Cornelius Fudge declared, Miss Umbridge is recognized by the chair. She may put her views forward. The pink toad controlled her emotions and said, Thank you, Minister. She then faced towards the council. I would correct the fact that 4 students were assaulting a Miss Lovegood. The fact has been not established in the council till now. She then faced Amelia and began as if trying to lecture Madame Bones, therefore, you should choose your words very carefully, Madame Bones. All those 4 students are respected member of our societies. They belong a pure-blood wizarding family and have a very high status in the wizarding world. What need will they have by assaulting a girl with no background and no status? I am very sure she must have tried to have some offhand measures to blackmail the 4 students. Upon not being successful, she would have framed all this story. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a pin-drop silence in the council. Madame Bones looked so intently at Umbridge, wondering if the toad has had her brain removed from her head. Chapter 64, Proceedings, 3. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. Harry, who heard all that the pink toad, almost went into a fit of rage and wanted nothing more than to jump down the edge from the visitors' gallery and fire a plethora of curses at her. But rationality prevailed in his mind, and he remembered what Amelia had told him earlier. Although he let go at that moment, he instilled the toad's image in his mind. Meanwhile, below in the courtroom, Amelia stared at Umbridge for some moments. Dolores Umbridge, on the other hand, lifted her chin in arrogance as if she has talked some kind of infinite wisdom. Amelia finally broke the silence. Do you understand yourself? What are you saying? Dolores felt her confidence shattering and she stammered, What do you mean? Amelia shook her head. Since the case is not related to the point you talked about, I would not delve into this matter. But some advice for you. She continued, Firstly, don't poke your nose into matters in which you have no standing, especially when you are opposing the words of Lord Apparent of most ancient and most noble house of Potter. She continued, Secondly, Miss Lovegood is of Lovegood family, a most ancient house. Dolores turned red-faced at words of Amelia Bones and was about to retort, when Dumbledore banged the gavel on table. I think we should continue with the case of matter at hand. Madame Bones, continue your argument, added Dumbledore further. Madame Bones then ignored the pink toad and brought her attention back on her argument. She started, as I was implying, Mr. Snape made a very subtle attempt to alienate the image of Mr. Potter, but the esteemed members of the council must keep in mind the fact that he did that action because those 4 students were trying to assault Miss Lovegood. She continued, keeping all these things in mind, I must conclude that it can be very clearly discerned that what Mr. Snape tried to imply is nothing but a twisted sense of perception. In no way he can justify his act of firing a bone-breaking curse at the head of Mr. Potter. The most leverage Mr. Snape can ask is that he did his act instinct and had no such intention. But then, we have no means to verify its truth. And the council must remember the fact that a crime committed even instinctively is a crime. The accused cannot escape punishment by saying that what he did was in haste or was instinctively. With her concluding remark, Amelia finished her argument and walked few steps behind. Dumbledore had a frustrated look on his face, while the grin on Snape's face had faded a bit. Even if he was going to get released today, his image was completely tarnished. Even if everyone votes in his favor, no is going to believe that he did not fire the bone-breaking curse on Harry Potter with the intention to kill. Dumbledore banged his gavel on the table. Severus, do you have to say anything in your counter-argument? Dumbledore asked this question just for formality, as he had already discussed with Snape all what he would be saying in his defense, and that was all Snape had mentioned in his defense. But Snape had his mind clouded because of his hatred for Harry, and the attack from Amelia further clouded his mind. He thought he had a chance to retrieve somewhat of his tarnished image and insult Harry Potter. After Dumbledore's question, Snape stood up from his wooden chair. Dumbledore gave an intense narrow glance at Snape, but the bat ignored it and walked forward to stand close to the members of the council. He began, I have few points to present so that the council could make an informed decision. The council must know about the behavior and the character of Mr. Potter before it can reach an informed decision, added Snape. Dumbledore was quick to interrupt, Severus, I think you should stay on the merits of the case and not talk about things unrelated to the case. The old coot indicated Snape to back down, but the bat ignored it. Headmaster, I believe all what I am about to say is quite related to the case, and only then the council can make an informed decision regarding the case. Dumbledore narrowed his gaze on Snape in annoyance. He wanted to bang the gavel on Snape's head so many times to make the idiot understand that Amelia Bones would chew him alive. This was best outcome he could have hoped for against a woman like her. Snape ignored everything and started, before the council could form a decision, the esteemed members must understand the behavior of Mr. Potter so that we can have a clear idea about the seriousness of Mr. Potter's accusation against me. Mr. Potter is serial rule breaker since his first year. Breaking rules like roaming after the curfew, talking during class are not something which can even be considered to be rule breaking compared to Mr. Potter's standard. For instance, during his second year, Mr. Potter along with his friend Ron Weasley flew the car of Mr. Arthur Weasley into Hogwarts, ultimately crashing it into the Whomping Willow. During his third year, again, Mr. Potter sneaked out of the Hogwarts castle despite warnings from the headmaster about the presence of Dementors around the castle and a mass murder on the run. This ultimately led to putting the lives of Mr. Potter and his friends in danger. These are just two of the numerous examples of Mr. Potter behavior during his 3-year stay of Hogwarts. He continued, I would say that Harry Potter is an entitled and arrogant brat who considers everything beneath him. He has no considerations for rules and regulations. I would conclude that all this accusation Mr. Potter had levied against me is a mere symbolic representation of his arrogance. He broke rules, tortured 4 students, and when I tried to stop him, he mocked me and then leveled this baseless accusation against me, concluded Severus Snape. Chapter 65, Proceedings, 4. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. Harry, hearing all this, had an expressionless face while standing on the edge of the visitors' gallery. Amelia had a slight smile on her face. Snape had his chin lifted high in the air as if he had accomplished something great in his life. This time Amelia did not wait for Dumbledore to bang his gavel and ask for argument. She stood up and walked close, although all what Mr. Snape talked about has nothing to do with the merit of the case, but no doubt, he had been successful in planting the seed of doubts in everybody's mind. She continued, I am not acutely aware of all these incidents what Mr. Snape talked about, as I had not prepared for things totally unrelated to the case. So, I can only hope for Mr. Potter to come forward and explain his situation. Dumbledore was about to object when Amelia continued, but I would like to bring another perspective in the views of the esteemed members of the council. What Mr. Snape talked about is the behavior and character of Mr. Potter. Now, every coin has 2 sides, and so has this case. Even if I put in the best and most generous of words, I would still have to say that Mr. Snape is the most hated professor at Hogwarts in the past few decades. His behavior with the students is very well known, and I believe that many of the esteemed members of the council must be aware of this. Calling out names to students, insulting them at every moment, calling them incompetent and creating an oppressive atmosphere is a normal thing in Mr. Snape's class. Amelia was going all guns blazing, or maybe all wands firing spells, but this is not all what that needs to be mentioned. All of his behavior could have been acceptable as a shortcoming in his management of temper if not for his duality. While Mr. Snape deducts points from non-Slytherin students for breathing loudly and walking with a sound in the corridors, he rewards the Slytherin students for being properly dressed or because they appear good in colors of House Slytherin. With every passing remark, those houses and people who were supporters of Dumbledore had a frown on their faces. They mostly had their children or grandchild in non-Slytherin house. Though they were aware of Snape's behavior, they had not thought much before agreeing to support Dumbledore in this case, but now, Amelia's argument had brought all those feelings back on the center stage. On the other hand, Dumbledore could see through the changing expressions of his supporters and could only curse Amelia and then Snape in his mind. Snape had also lost all his arrogant smirk, and he had a realization that he had made grave error. He cursed himself for not listening to Dumbledore. Madame Bones continued, this duality from Mr. Snape shows that what he does not a shortcoming of his anger issue but an agenda-driven behavior. Also, Mr. Snape as a professor is highly incompetent. Thanks to his incompetency we had a drastic decrease in students getting good grades in Owls of Potions and taking potions in Newts. Thanks to this, we have a massive shortage of Podiwhunners and Aurors, as Newts in Potions is compulsory to be an Auror. Of those very rare few students who take newts in potions, 90% are from Slytherin House, which clearly proves his method of teaching. While Mr. Snape put down a lot of allegations against Mr. Potter regarding his shortcomings in his character, Mr. Snape himself is worse than that. She continued, while we are discussing this, I must take us few years in the past. We cannot forget the actions of Mr. Snape in the past. We must remember Mr. Snape's association with the Volda. Dumbledore interrupted exactly at this moment. Amelia, I believe we need not go on topics of the past. The matter was solved at that time, and so the past must remain buried as it was. Amelia chuckled. It is Madame Bones for you, Chief Warlock. Please maintain the dignity of the office you are holding. She continued calmly, and also, it was you buried the matter. And even if don't speak, the world will definitely talk about a former Death Eater firing a bone-breaking curse at the savior of the wizarding world. Dumbledore went red in anger on the mention of the matter. Although everyone present here was aware of the matter, he did not wish it to be talked about again. Also, the main reason was he did not want Harry to find out Snape's identity as a former Death Eater. He asked in annoyance, is there anything more you want to add on, Amelia? Amelia shook her head. I believe this is more than enough. Although I believe we can call Mr. Potter to answer the accusation Mr. Snape made against Mr. Potter. Dumbledore instantly shook his head in denial. I believe that is not required. We have already wasted a lot of time on things which have nothing to do with this particular case. No more wastage of time is required. He banged the gavel. I adjourn this council for 15 minutes. When the council resumes 15 minutes later, we would vote on if Severus Snape is guilty of trying to kill Harry Potter with the intention of ending his family line. He added, and if guilty, the council will decide the punishment for Severus Snape. Adjourn, announced Dumbledore in a booming voice. With this announcement, all the members of the council stood up from their seats and left to discuss the matter among themselves. Chapter 66, Verdict. September 1994. Ministry of Magic. While all the members of the council left their respective seats and walked outside the hall, Harry continued to stand at the edge of the cliff. Though he could walk in as a witness to his own case and add more to what Amelia did to Snape, he was not going to do anything like that. Today he was going to remain as a mere spectator. He had to also consider his options going forward. After Amelia described to him what consequences his actions could cause, he needed to reevaluate himself. Though he did not care much about others, he could not go on isolating himself. While Harry was busy in his internal musings, Rita Skeeter approached him from behind. "Hello, Mr. Potter," greeted Rita. Harry acknowledged her with nod back but did not greet her back. Rita's face tightened a bit on being ignored like this. She snapped her fingers and a quick quotes quill popped from her purse. "Mr. Potter, a word," said Rita. "Sorry, Miss Skeeter, I don't think this is a suitable time to talk," replied Harry. Rita ignored what Harry said. "Are you feeling any kind of remorse about what you did yesterday, or do you believe whatever you did was the correct thing to do?" She continued without any break. "Also, what do you have to say about the accusation you have levied against Mr. Snape? Do you believe it is a good thing to target a Hogwarts professor?" Harry was speechless at the shamelessness of the reporter. He stared intensely at Rita for few moments, which was enough for Rita to make her uncomfortable, and considering the fact what Harry had done to the 4 boys yesterday, she shivered a bit in fright. Harry sighed. "Miss Skeeter, please understand what I said earlier. I don't think this is a suitable time to talk. Maybe I will consider in future." With this, Harry walked a couple of paces away from where he was standing. Though Rita was not someone to give up easily, but considering the fact that she was in public and probably dealing with a lunatic, decided not to push too far. For the next few minutes, Harry waited calmly on the edge of the visiting gallery in silence. After the 15-minute of adjournment was complete, the members of the council started to take their seats. In the last arrived Dumbledore, who took his seat of the Chief Warlock, and after a gesture from him, Snape walked in accompanied by Kingsley Shacklebolt. Snape took his wooden chair. Harry noticed that Amelia was now not standing in the well of the council but was seated among the members of the council. "The council is resumed," announced Dumbledore with a bang of his gavel. He continued, "Now, I will put the matter of Severus Snape accused of trying to kill Mr. Harry Potter to vote. Those who believe Mr. Snape to be guilty of the charges, please lift up your wand," announced Dumbledore. With his announcement, Amelia was the first to raise her wand, and then 2 more wands lit up. Harry did not recognize these people, and they were most probably in some kind of relation with the Bones family. Though he was disappointed but not surprised that, Minerva McGonagall did not raise her wand. "Those who believe Mr. Snape to be innocent of the charges, please lit up your wand," announced Dumbledore again. Followed by this, most of the remaining wand lit up. Harry again was surprised that Minerva McGonagall again did not raise her wand, implying she abstained from voting. "Severus Snape is declared innocent of charges," announced Dumbledore and banged his gavel 3 times on the table. "Council adjourned," announced Dumbledore. With the declaration of the verdict, the members of the council started to leave their seats, while also climbed down the staircase and walked outside of the visitors' gallery. Harry after another few steps reached the same large wooden gate where he had separated from Madame Bones. Members of the council were coming out from the wooden gate, while Harry stood waiting for Professor McGonagall. Finally, Minerva along with Amelia came out of the gate. "Disappointed, Mr. Potter?" asked Amelia. Harry shook his head. "No, Madame Bones. Rather, I am quite happy with how you presented my case. We all know that being declared innocent or guilty does not depend whether the crime has been committed or not, but rather on who is able to garner more support in the council," added Harry. "Oh! How I wish I could retort and talk to you about how justice is served in this great council, but even I cannot deny the elephant in the room," sighed Amelia. She added further, "More so to you, who would soon be joining this treacherous place." Harry nodded and turned towards Minerva. "I think we should now return, Professor." Minerva was about to reply when there was a flutter of footsteps and came out Dumbledore surrounded by his minions. Dumbledore walked slowly, smiled relaxedly as a man of his stature should. The old coot did not ignore the trio but rather came and stood face to face to Harry. "Harry, my boy," he sighed with his face turning to that of a depressed one, "you have greatly disappointed me." He did not let Harry speak. A seeking answer was not his motive. His motive was to showcase his superiority in front of Harry, to make Harry realize that even with the Potter name he was nothing without Dumbledore's support. He then faced Minerva. "I also did not expect this from you, Minerva." Minerva looked at him and frowned. "Bringing a student here without my permission is not something I expected of you, Minerva." Minerva frowned. "I believe that allowing any student to leave the castle is discretion of the head of house of the student. I did nothing wrong." Dumbledore ignored Minerva's comment. "We will talk about this in the castle." And with this the old coot walked away. Minerva wanted to retort loudly that there is nothing to talk about, as what she did was according to rules and she understood very well what games Dumbledore was trying to play, but ultimately said nothing. He was trying to put himself on a high pedestal. Chapter 67, After Snape's Trial. September 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 2 days had passed since Snape's trial at the Wizengamot. The newspapers of the next day had this news plastered all over its top page. The most intriguing articles had been written by Rita Skeeter. She had painted colorful pictures of the story and only God knows how she had connected a lot of figs to Dumbledore and had written viciously about the headmaster. Another target of her attack was none other than Snape, and no, the point it talked about was not Snape's attack on Harry Potter, the boy who lived. She raised points like incompetency of Snape as a professor and his behavior towards students. She had even interviewed few ex-students of Hogwarts who were more than happy to share their experiences of Snape at Hogwarts. Rita went as far as ahead to organize and present data from Wizarding Exam Authority to show the poor result of the students in potions. Normally such a story would have caused a huge uproar, but because of the more high-profile nature of Snape's trial and Harry's action, this story had garnered less attention. Meanwhile Snape bore a more enhanced smirk on his face parading around Hogwarts. In these 2 days Harry did not had a potions class. Strangely she had not mentioned Harry Potter more than necessary to report the facts, and only subtle remarks had been made against him. Harry wondered if he had scared her anyhow. At the school most of the students looked at him in fear, panic, or disgust and were trying to maintain a distance from him. Harry was all okay with as long as he did not have to involve himself with a bunch of idiots. Though Hermione did not maintain any distance from him, she had gotten herself busy in preparing for something and Harry had no idea whatsoever. The second person who behaved normally with him and Harry would say that he even somewhat enjoyed her presence was Luna Lovegood. Though he did not had much time to spend with her, even the small interactions with her were lively and most importantly free any kind of malice. Harry could safely say that if there was a color grading for a soul and black represented the evilest of them, then Luna would be pure pristine white. Pandora had been described in great detail in Lily's diary and was her dearest friend. Lily had described Pandora to be an extremely kind and gentle person with not a single bone of treachery. Harry had felt a lot of grief when he learned that she was no longer in this world. Talking about Luna, the matter of bullying had been dealt with in an extreme manner by Professor Flitwick. All the prefects had been removed from their position. Large amounts of points had been deducted from their house, plunging it into negatives nearing 1,000. In addition, 3 senior students responsible for Luna not able to enter the Ravenclaw dormitory were suspended for 3 weeks. Harry wondered how did Dumbledore even allowed suspension of the students? He was after all a preacher of forgiveness. Harry, on the other hand, have not heard any news from the side of the 4 boys he had punished. He had not seen them in Hogwarts till now, but if they arrived it would mean they would be challenging Harry's declaration of blood feud and Harry would definitely kill them. And even if Harry was having second thoughts about his plans, he was not going to back down from feud he had declared. Also, since the event of that night Harry had not gone even one single time in his dormitory and he had permanently shifted in the Chamber of Secrets. In these 2 days his elves had clearly extracted all the material from the basilisk and had cleaned the chamber perfectly. Following Harry's instructions, the elves had placed the remaining corpse of the basilisk in a wooden coffin. Harry had decided that on a suitable opportunity he would bury the basilisk on the Hogwarts ground itself. September 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Today was the day he was going to talk to Susan Bones and Daphne Greengrass. He was not sure if the Greengrass heiress would still so much enthusiastic after what had happened. He arrived early in the Great Hall to discover that Daphne and Susan were already having their breakfast. Harry too sat quickly on the Gryffindor table and had a quick breakfast. By the time he was finished the 2 witches had also been done with their breakfast. He walked near the large wooden door of the Great Hall where both the girls were standing together. He greeted, "Good morning, Miss Greengrass," and then he faced Susan, "Good morning, Miss Bones." Both of the girls greeted him back. Harry was quick to notice that there was no visible change in expression on Daphne's face from the previous time, and Susan also had a normal expression, nothing the sort of whole Hogwarts had for him. Daphne took the lead, "We should take this to some place quiet." Harry nodded and followed behind Daphne, who brought them on the 3rd floor and found an abandoned classroom. After entering she closed the door and took out her wand and performed 2 spells in quick succession. Harry easily recognized the spell. The first one was a door-locking charm while the second one was a privacy charm, ensuring no one could spy over their conversation. Seeing that the classroom was not in a good condition, Harry conjured 3 chairs. The trio then occupied their seats and was in awkward silence for few seconds. Chapter 68, Discussion. September 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Daphne broke the awkward silence, "I think we should start in a chronological manner." Harry nodded in agreement, "We will do as you say." Daphne looked at Susan, who nodded at her and started, "Let us begin with a brief background of the Great Alliance. I believe, Mr. Potter, that whatever you have learned about the Alliance is through memoirs of your families and your ancestors." Harry nodded, "Yes." Susan continued, "The Great Alliance dates back to 5 centuries. Though we had had major changes in the wizarding world during this time period, the Alliance always reinvented itself in new form. The Great Alliance, as if we refer, is an alliance based on the pillar of 4 families. 4 most ancient and most noble families. The Black, the Greengrass, the Potter, and the Longbottom. Daphne picked up the conversation. On the spectrum, Black family would be called as a dark family while the Longbottom would be called a purely light family. My family, i.e., the Greengrass, is in grey zone with a slight tilt towards the dark, while Potters are also a grey family with a slight tilt towards light. This in itself is a unique feature of the Alliance." She continued, "Because of the sheer influence of the Alliance over the time, many families joined in the Alliance and some withdrew too because of many disturbances." Susan began to speak, "The Alliance suffered its biggest setback during the war against who know who. 3 of the 4 families got destroyed during the war." Harry added with a thoughtful expression, 3 of those who aligned themselves completely to Dumbledore. Both the girls looked at him in surprise but then nodded their head in agreement. "What happened during the war is a topic for another day. We should talk about the main issue, which is why did we not approach you directly," said Daphne. Susan said, "As soon as you know who was vanquished, you also disappeared from the wizarding world. Other than Dumbledore's assurances of your safety and those fantasy novels, we heard nothing about you. When the time was about for you to return, we were slightly hopeful. But sorry to say this, Mr. Potter, you were nothing we had expected. And I am not talking about you slaying a dragon or living in castle. You were nothing like a lord apparent of most ancient and most noble house should be. You were pathetic, coward and shivering child." Daphne began, "Although we could not have blamed an 11-year child for this, but we were disappointed. Also, hatred for a student just because he or she is Slytherin was visible in your actions, or more specifically your friends' words. You had no knowledge of our world, of our alliance or anything related to it. Susan said, we could have approached you and tried to inform you of your heritage, but you were completely under Dumbledore's thumb. He would have easily manipulated you against us, and it would have also resulted in his hostility towards us. Therefore, the best course of action that we could have taken at that time was to wait silently and be hopeful that someday you are independent enough to take your own decisions. But opposite of it happened. Year by year you were increasingly getting more aligned with Dumbledore, added Susan. Daphne said, but this year was a surprise for us. We first heard about it when you openly mentioned about it during the Quidditch World Cup in front of Malfoy. She sighed, our explanation to you might sound slight unconvincing and not up to the mark, but we had not too many options. We were on a slippery path, especially my family. We were facing constant pressure from both the Light family and the Dark family. In such times we could have only been cautious. After this both of the girls went quiet and waited for Harry to speak. As you said, your explanations are flawed and unconvincing, started Harry, his words bringing an expression of worry on face of Susan and Daphne. Harry continued, but I find it acceptable. I can understand the hard times your family was in. At this both of the girls were relieved. Harry asked, now, tell me about Neville Longbottom. Why were you not prepared to bring him to this meeting? What did you meant by him having a unique case? The two girls exchanged glances with each other, then Susan questioned, Mr. Potter, are you aware of what happened with Neville Longbottom's parents and what is their current condition? Harry nodded, they were tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange and currently, I believe they are in coma. Yes. The attack on his parents and their current condition has left very severe traumatic experience on Neville. This is the reason for the anxiety, panic, and cowardice you witness in Neville's daily behavior, said Daphne. Harry nodded, this is what I suspected. So, his cowardice is the reason you did not invite him? Asked Harry with a narrowed expression. If this would be the reason, all the good impression he had of the girl duo would be washed away. Daphne quickly shook her head, no, Mr. Potter. Harry nodded in understanding, indicating Daphne to continue. She continued, currently, Madame Augusta Longbottom holds regency of the Neville Longbottom. But after the attack on her son and daughter-in-law, she has completely cut herself off from the wizarding world. Even when we had no formal alliance, my family and the Greengrass would meet from time and also allowed friendship to bloom between us, the future ladies of the houses, added Susan. She continued, but Madame Longbottom never allowed Neville out of their home. If it was possible, she would have wanted Neville to complete his study from his home only. She never talked anything with us. We are not even sure if she will even agree to revive the alliance. Harry nodded his head in understanding. Many of you were complaining about the slow pace of story, but fret not, the story is about to pick up pace, is going to get more interesting. Though it has taken a lot of time, I have been able to set up the background up to my satisfaction. Check out my Patreon, the story has reached an interesting point there. Chapter 69, Imperious Curse. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. More than a month had passed since Harry's meeting with Daphne and Susan. After that meeting, Harry had met the witch duo few more times. It was finally decided that Harry would meet Amelia Bones and Sinus Greengrass during the Christmas break to finalize a final agreement. Although Harry had not informed Daphne and Susan, he also planned to meet Augusta Longbottom during the break. In his pursuit of the alliance, Harry tried to approach Neville Longbottom few times, but the boy was so scared even of Harry's presence that Harry had to give up. Harry also had fulfilled the little test the Professor of Ancient Runes, Baths Hada Babbling, and the Professor of Arithmancy Septima Vector had asked of him to join their class midway. Harry wondered how much of an idiot he had been to choose divination over these two subjects. Harry was delighted to deal with these subjects. It was the only subject which he had a chance to explore without any limits. And Harry could have safely agreed that in terms of knowledge and teaching aptitude these two professors were the best Hogwarts have to offer. Potions had turned to be the most interesting of classes. He had continued his pairing with Daphne and Tracy. Snape continued to behave like the git he was with the rest of the students, but every time he saw Harry, the smirk on his face would vanish. And to up the ante, Harry would always grin in his direction. Probably since he was pairing with two Slytherin students, he also could not take points from Harry. Demonstrating the short-term memory, the wizarding world had everything from Snape's trial to his incompetence to Harry's action was quickly forgotten. In the month, the weird and frightened gazes Harry used to receive from the students also reduced. The four boys involved in Luna's case and Harry's blood feud had not taken any action. From what Harry had heard, they had dropped out of Hogwarts and shifted out to some other country. About Sirius's condition, Harry felt helpless. After thinking a lot, he came to conclusion to get Sirius free of his accusations he would need to have an absolute thumping majority support in Wizengamot, then only his case would be heard. Otherwise, the likes of Fudge, Dumbledore, and Lucius would not take even seconds to put everything in a trash can. The only other method was to have a concrete evidence. And that concrete evidence was Peter Pettigrew. The only beacon of light was that Sirius was safe for now. Harry decided that he would bring up this topic during his meeting with Amelia Bones and Sinus Greengrass. The other thing worth mentioning was Hermione's new society, SPEW, Society for the Performance of Elfish Welfare, and then Harry realized what was Hermione busy in the past few weeks. It was almost impossible to make Hermione stand how the elvish bonds worked, and they were no slaves but in a symbiotic relationship. Hermione was extremely adamant in accepting the explanation, but she finally relented. She added that she would do more research, and Harry earnestly asked her to conduct surveys with the house elves of first. And now she was trying to find her way to Hogwarts kitchen. Meanwhile, Harry continued to maintain his living arrangement in the Chamber of Secrets, and he was happy being there. Harry had also expected to be called to Dumbledore's office at least once or twice for grandfatherly advice and subtle manipulation, but surprisingly not even a single summon was sent. Dumbledore did not even try to interfere with him for even once. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry arrived early in the morning for the Dada classes, only to discover that they would be put under Imperius Curse. Hermione was quick to point, "But you said it is illegal, Professor." "Dumbledore wants you taught what it feels like," said Moody, his magical eye swiveling onto Hermione and fixing her with an eerie, unblinking stare. "If you'd rather learn the hard way when someone's putting it on you so they can control you completely, fine by me. You're excused. Off you go." Hermione turned pink and muttered something like that she did not mean that she wanted to leave. Hearing this, Harry stood up and walked towards the door, when Moody's gruff voice interrupted him. "Where are you going, Potter?" Harry turned around and replied, "I am not allowing any wizard to put an Imperius on me. One mistake and I will lose my mind. Maybe you will never let me out of your control, or maybe something else. I am not allowing anybody to mess with my mind," declared Harry. This declaration brought sudden gasps from the students, and they realized that what they were considering a simple thing could have such consequences. For Harry, even Voldemort's Imperius Curse would not control him. He won't feel more than a tug in his mindscape, but Harry did not want Dumbledore playing around with students' mind. Harry turned around to leave, but stopped at the gate and said, "After all constant vigilance, Professor." Following Harry's action, no student was ready to be put under Imperius, and thus the class ended without any class. At the end, the notice of the arrival of delegates from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang on October 30th was pasted near the entrance of the Great Hall. This had sent the whole of Hogwarts in a buzz of excitement. The entire dinner time was filled with the chattering of the students about the arrival of the delegates. Harry had finished his dinner and was about to get up and leave when Minerva stood in his path. "Mr. Potter, Headmaster wants to have a word with you." Harry sighed and nodded. Chapter 70, Dumbledore's Summon. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Minerva and Harry walked in silence through the corridors of Hogwarts. Harry could feel awkwardness creeping in. He sighed, "Is there something you want to say, Professor?" Minerva did not respond immediately and continued to walk. After a while she said, "Though you have good enough reasons to hold resentment for a lot of people including me, you must never give up goodness and kindness, Mr. Potter. I know you have no reasons to believe in authorities of Hogwarts, as they did not get you justice for anything in the past 3 years, but still what you did was not acceptable, Mr. Potter. Even if you did not believe us, you should have called for DMLE and let law take its course. Taking matters into your own hands and in that brutal manner is not something I can appreciate," added Minerva. "I will keep this in mind," Harry replied simply. He continued, "But if law could take its course, Snape should have been in Azkaban and not here." He added further, "You know very well, Professor, that law does not take its course in the wizarding world. Who controls the majority in Wizengamot is what takes course here." Minerva went silent at Harry's argument, and she went silent. After all, what Harry was saying was truth. Snape was not the only example. Lucius Malfoy and many others Death Eaters had easily gotten scot-free with an illogical argument. Soon they reached the headmaster's office, and after a knock Minerva entered the office followed by Harry. As soon as Harry entered the office, his eyes was inadvertently drawn towards the Gryffindor sword for few moments. Only then Harry took note of other occupants of the room. Sitting behind the desk was Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. But what surprises Harry was the presence of other professors in the room. Sitting on the left side of the deck in his usual position was Severus Snape. Next to him was Alastor Moody. Sitting on the right side of the desk was Pomona Sprout and Phileas Flitwick. Dumbledore greeted, "Good evening, Harry. Take a seat. You too, Minerva," he added. Harry and Minerva both took their respective seats in front of the desk. Dumbledore began, "Harry, I have called you for your conduct during the classes. Not only you did not attend the class itself but you also motivated other students in joining the class. That is why I have also requested to other heads of house to be present in the meeting." Harry did not reply anything and simply kept silence. If it was earlier, Harry would have started explaining his viewpoint, allowing Dumbledore to take a lead in the conversation. For now, Dumbledore had only made statements and had not asked any question. Seeing Harry not saying anything, Dumbledore frowned. "Why are you not speaking anything, Harry?" Harry replied in a sweet voice, "But I did not hear you asking any question." Dumbledore gritted his teeth in anger. "I asked about you not taking the class and motivating all other students to do the same. What do you have to say on this?" Harry was calm. "I only did what Professor Motti told us. He said that it was our choice to decide if we want to attend the class or not." Dumbledore frowned. "Those words were not literal, Harry. He merely said so as he assumed that nobody would really leave the class." Harry nodded and kept quiet and did not argue or said anything. Dumbledore sighed. "I hope in your next class you will be present. I also hope that till that time, you can convince other students that what you did was an immature act on your part and everyone should go through the Imperious Curse exercise." Harry shook his head. "I think, Professor Motti did not tell you all things which I said in the class." He continued, "I will repeat it for you. I will not allow anyone to mess with my mind." Dumbledore frowned again and put up a disappointed look. "Harry, this exercise is meant for the betterment of you all. It will help to build up some resistance to the Imperious Curse." He pressed, "But now your refusal has caused the whole of school to stay away from this exercise." Harry sighed. Dumbledore was really a master at his games. He had intentionally asked to participate the professors in the meeting so as to create additional pressure on him. Also, by referring to the benefit of all the students being put in jeopardy because of him, the headmaster was trying to put Harry in guilt. Harry sighed, "Professors and headmaster, I may be very well wrong." At this Dumbledore's lips curved up into a smirk. Harry continued, "But I am steadfast in my resolve. If you really believe that it is for our betterment, then convince the other students for it." He added, "I did not ask anyone to do anything. And surely, your words definitely hold a lot of weight than me." He added further, "And even if the respective head of houses and the headmaster of school is not able to convince the students, then what can I say?" Dumbledore felt his temper rising while the other professors remained expressionless. Dumbledore questioned, "So, you will not attend this exercise?" "No," replied Harry. Dumbledore sighed, "For your refusal to attend the classes, you will be punished, Harry. 100 points from Gryffindor and 3 weeks detention." Seeing persuasion not working, Dumbledore could only resort to harsher methods. Harry did not reply to Dumbledore and faced Minerva. "Professor, can you please contact Madame Bones? I want to make a formal complaint about Hogwarts trying to forcefully cast an Imperious Curse on me." Dumbledore lost his composure and snapped, "What is the meaning of this, Harry? This is Hogwarts matter and you will be punished accordingly." Harry nodded. "Indeed, me not attending classes is a Hogwarts matter, but trying to forcefully cast Imperious on me is DMLE matter." Dumbledore gritted his teeth in frustration. Ultimately, he sighed, "You can leave." Chapter 71, Arrival of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The whole of Hogwarts was standing on the Hogwarts main entrance in anticipation of the arrival of the delegates from Beauxbatons Academy of Magic and Durmstrang Institute. The anticipation soon ended as the Beauxbatons delegates were the first to arrive. The delegates had arrived in flying carriages carried by a dozen of horse-like creatures but with wings. The delegate was being led by the principal of the Beauxbatons Academy, a half-giant Olympe Maxime. Following behind her were 12 students and one among them was a half-Vila. Dumbledore greeted the delegates with all the novelty and they soon went inside the warmth of the Hogwarts. The Beauxbatons were soon followed by Durmstrang Institute. The delegates had arrived in massive ship in the lake in front of Hogwarts. The delegate was being led by the headmaster of the institute, Igor Karkaroff. Harry did not need even a second to recognize the former Death Eater from Voldemort's memories. Karkaroff was an immensely sadistic and cruel person. He was someone who took pleasure in torturing innocents and weak. But he was a coward to the core. As soon as Voldemort fell, he immediately surrendered, and in return for some crucial information he was let go. Following behind him were a dozen students from Durmstrang. One of those 12 was Victor Krum. The moment his presence was noted by the Hogwarts' students, a wave of excitement passed by. Ron Weasley cannot keep himself shut about the greatness of Victor Krum. Soon the delegates were seated in the Great Hall. Students from Beauxbatons Academy took their seat on the Ravenclaw table while the Durmstrang took their seat at Slytherin table, much to Ron's disappointment. Harry was quick to notice 4 additional chairs at the staff table and wondered for whom were the extra chairs arranged. Soon his doubt was cleared when Ludo Bagman and Bartmeus Crouch arrived in the Great Hall. The feast began and everyone indulged them the varieties of food that had been served, including French dishes. The most hilarious scene occurred when the Veela girl came at the Gryffindor table to ask for a particular French dish and Ron Weasley could only stammer and drool. Though Ron was not the only student to be in such a condition, he was definitely the worst one. Harry could tell that the girl had been suppressing her allure to its limit. Harry could only imagine what would happen if she deliberately targets the male students of Hogwarts. The feast was over and Dumbledore stood up to announce the official beginning of the Triwizard Tournament. He firstly introduced the 2 representatives from the Ministry and then spoke about the nature of the test the champions will have to go through. And on the method of the selection of champions, he said about an impartial judge and then Filch brought a large enough wooden casket. Dumbledore tapped on the casket and the lid creaked slowly open. Dumbledore reached inside it and pulled out a large, roughly hewn wooden cup. It would have been entirely unremarkable had it not been full to the brim with dancing blue-white flames. This was the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore then explained about anyone wanting to enter the competition to submit their names inside the goblet. He informed, once selected the student would be bound in a magical contract and they would have no chance to back down. Harry sighed at idiocy of the wizarding world. To use a powerful artifact in this matter to host a competition meant for students was complete foolishness in Harry's view. Why would you force such a contract on the student? It was just a simple competition to promote unity among the 3 schools. After this, Dumbledore detailed more about the competition and declared that he would himself be drawing an age line to prevent students below 17 from entering their names. At this moment, Harry felt like he was looking at an idiot. When you have such an artifact that could enforce magical contracts, then why draw a manual age line? Add the criteria about the age in the contract itself. To breach it would be near impossible. But a manual line was far too easy to breach. Most of the professors could do that. Heck, why to cross the magical line? Why not simply throw the paper from outside the line? Thinking about all this, Harry felt a premonition in his heart. He sighed, took a deep breath and calmed his heart. The feast ended and Harry got up and walked towards the door. Harry reached the same moment Karkaroff reached the doors followed by students. Harry stopped to let him walk through first. "Thank you," said Karkaroff carelessly, glancing at him. And then Karkaroff froze. He turned his head back to Harry and stared at him as though he couldn't believe his eyes. Durmstrang students also came to a halt and stared at Harry in curiosity, wondering their headmaster was so piqued up seeing Harry. Meanwhile Karkaroff was intensely staring at Harry's forehead, trying hard to find the famous scar. Harry chuckled, trying to find the symbol of defeat of Voldemort, Headmaster Karkaroff. Karkaroff was taken aback at Voldemort's name and shivered in fright. Harry paid no need, "Don't worry about superfluous symbols, Headmaster Karkaroff." He continued, "Me being alive after taking a killing curse from Voldemort is all the symbol you need." Karkaroff again flinched at the name and so did many other surrounding students who had gathered at the door due to blocked passage. "Now if you stop blocking the passage," added Harry further. Karkaroff instinctively stepped aside giving passage to Harry who walked away from the door. Harry while walking away caught Alastor Moody looking at him with a very strange expression. Chapter 72, The 4 Champions. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It was the night of the selection of the champions. Harry was seating at one end of the Gryffindor table and was enjoying the feast. The previous day had been extremely exciting for the students of Hogwarts. Everyone was buzzing from excitement wondering who could be the Hogwarts champion. The list of students who had put their name in the goblet was definitely not small. Cedric Diggory was among the most talked student. He was the one of the best students of Hogwarts. He was also the seeker for the Hufflepuff and the person who had defeated Harry in catching the snitch the previous year. He was also the current head boy of Hogwarts. Angelina Johnson, the Gryffindor chaser, was also among the list of students to put their name in the goblet. Neither was the list small of students who were younger than 17 years and had tried to bypass the age line and failed. Most iconic among the Weasley twins. The age line evicted them with white beards almost equal in size to the beard of Dumbledore growing on their face. Though not as excited as the whole of Hogwarts, Harry was also in a bit of anticipation and eagerness to see how the Triwizard Tournament would unfold. He also felt quite relieved by the fact that, for first time in 4 years, he would be away from all the limelight and he can continue his simple life. The tournament would keep Dumbledore busy and away from interfering in his life. He would have all the time he needed to build back the alliance and try to work out a solution to Sirius's problem. The feast was over and the time for the announcement of the champion was approaching. Every student was checking the time continuously. "Well, the goblet is almost ready to make its decision," said Dumbledore. "I estimate that it requires 1 more minute. Now, when the champions' names are called, I would ask them please to come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber." He indicated the door behind the staff table where they will be receiving their first instructions. Dumbledore took out his wand and with a sweeping motion from it, most of the candles in the Great Hall extinguished, plunging them all in semi-darkness. The flames inside the goblet seemed to shine more brightly in the darkness. Everyone waited eagerly for the announcement. The flames inside the goblet suddenly turned red. Sparks began to fly from it. Next moment, a tongue of flame shot into the air, a charred piece of parchment fluttered out of it. The whole room gasped. Dumbledore caught the piece of parchment. "The champion for Durmstrang," he read, in a strong, clear voice, "will be Viktor Krum." There was a big round of applause inside the hall. Ron shot to his feet, cheering loudly as if he himself was selected. Viktor Krum was almost expressionless. He nodded to his headmaster and walked towards the staff table and then inside the room as instructed by Dumbledore. Karkaroff also boomed loudly, cheering for his students. The clapping gradually died down and everyone's attention was again focused on the goblet. The flame inside the goblet turned red again and another piece of parchment flew out of it. "The champion for Beaux Batons," said Dumbledore, "is Fleur Delacour." The same girl who had asked Ron for the French dish previous night and whom Harry had recognized as a half-Veela was the one to respond. The face of the remaining student from Beaux Batons turned into that of disappointment, though disappointment was an understatement as 2 girls had started to sob. When Fleur Delacour too had vanished into the side chamber, silence fell again, but this time it was a silence so stiff with excitement you could almost taste it. The Hogwarts champion next. And the goblet of fire turned red once more, sparks showered out of it, the tongue of flame shot high into the air, and from its tip Dumbledore pulled the 3rd piece of parchment. "The Hogwarts champion," he called, "is Cedric Diggory." The whole of Hogwarts erupted into cheers and without any doubt the cheer was the loudest from Hufflepuff table. Dumbledore began his little speech about cheering for the 3 champions when he was interrupted midway. The fire in the goblet turned red again and another piece of parchment flew from the goblet which Dumbledore caught instinctively. Dumbledore stared at the parchment and all the students stared at Dumbledore. It was a long pause of silence from Dumbledore. He then cleared his throat and read the name on the parchment, Harry Potter. The entire hall was plunged into pin-drop silence. Everyone was staring at him. Harry was stunned. He was in daze. He was shocked beyond belief. It took some moment for him to understand what was happening. And when he did understand, anger and rage took over him. "Harry Potter!" Dumbledore called again. "Harry! Up here, if you please." Harry stood on his feet with clenched fist and gritted teeth. At this moment, Harry lost control over all his magic and a suffocating feeling started to spread around with Harry as center. Students sitting close to Harry subconsciously felt fear and tried to shift as far as away from him. They could vividly recall the memory of what Harry had done to the 4 students. "I did not put my name into," declared Harry. His voice carrying all the anger and aggression he was feeling. "Well. Through the door, Harry," said Dumbledore. He completely ignored what Harry said. Harry took control over his emotions and let out a sigh. He then walked towards the staff table and then inside the room. Chapter 73, Harry's Response. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Inside the room Viktor Krum, Cedric Diggory, and Fleur Delacour were grouped around the fire. Viktor Krum was standing slightly apart from the 2 while Cedric was standing with his hands behind the back and eyes focused on the fire. Fleur Delacour looked around when Harry walked in and threw back her sheet of long, silvery hair. "What is it?" she said. "Do they want us back in the hall?" She thought he had come to deliver a message. Harry did not answer her question and stood impassively. There was a sound of scurrying feet behind him, and Ludo Bagman entered the room. He marched towards Harry and tried to take hold of his arms, but one stare from Harry's glowing green eyes and he stepped back nervously. "Extraordinary," he muttered, after taking control back over his emotions. "Absolutely extraordinary. Gentlemen. Lady," he added, approaching the fireside and addressing the other three. "May I introduce, incredible though it may seem, the 4th Triwizard Champion." Victor Krum straightened a bit while Cedric looked nonplussed. He looked from Bagman and Harry. Fleur Delacour smiled. "Very funny joke, Mr. Bagman." "Joke?" Bagman repeated, bewildered. No, not at all. Harry's name just came out of the goblet of fire." Victor furrowed his brows while Cedric looked bewildered. Fleur frowned. "But evidently there has been a mistake," she said contemptuously to Bagman. "He cannot compete. He is too young." Bagman then tried to explain how the age restriction was something which has only been introduced this year, and since Harry's name came out of the goblet he would have to continue. The door behind them opened again, and a large group of people came in. Professor Dumbledore, followed closely by Mr. Crouch, Professor Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape. Harry heard the buzzing of the hundreds of students on the other side of the wall, before Professor McGonagall closed the door. "Madame Maxime," said Fleur at once, striding over to her headmistress. "They are saying that this little boy is to compete also." Harry felt his anger rising on being treated as if he was not even present in the room. He felt anger about how Fleur kept referring to him as he was some insignificant worm. The same phenomenon of suffocation which had happened earlier in the Great Hall repeated itself in the room. Magic swirled around in Harry and his presence felt heavy. Whatever Madame Maxime was about to reply got choked in her mouth. "What is this happening, headmaster?" asked Harry. "Surely, you would have an explanation," said Harry with his voice rising after every word. "Of how my name came out of the goblet when you had drawn the age restriction line yourself." Madame Maxime regained her composure. "What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore?" she said imperiously. "I'd rather like to know that myself, Dumbledore," said Professor Karkaroff. He was wearing a steely smile, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice. "2 Hogwarts champions? I don't remember anyone telling me the host school is allowed 2 champions, or have I not read the rules carefully enough?" He gave a short and nasty laugh. "That is impossible," said Madame Maxime. "Hogwarts cannot have 2 champions. It is most unjust. We were under the impression that your age line would keep out younger contestants, Dumbledore," said Karkaroff, his steely smile still in place, though his eyes were colder than ever. "Otherwise, we would, of course, have brought along a wider selection of candidates from our own schools." "It's no one's fault but Potter's, Karkaroff," said Snape softly. His black eyes were alight with malice. "Don't go blaming Dumbledore for Potter's determination to break rules. He has been crossing lines ever since he arrived here." Snape was not even finished with his sentence when he was struck by a yellow light, and before anyone knew he was smashed onto the wooden chair placed near the wall, breaking it into pieces and then on the wall. Everyone turned around to see Harry holding his phoenix wand in his right hand. Harry's green eyes were glowing brightly, but they appeared extremely dangerous and ominous. The weaker people in the room, the likes of Bagman, Cedric, Victor and Fleur, subconsciously took a step back away from Harry. "Harry!" shouted Dumbledore with his eyes flaring with anger. The old man was truly angry this time, and he also lost the control over his powerful magic. His beard floated in air and magic swirled around him. This was Dumbledore, the leader of the light and the most powerful wizard alive, and definitely among the greatest to exist in the wizarding history. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted. Harry ignored his question and faced Snape, who was struggling to reach for his wand, which was lying on the floor at some distance from Snape. Harry flickered his right hand and another yellow light shot from his wand. The spell struck Snape on the chest and he was again smashed into the wall. A sound of crack followed, indication few broken bones in Snape's body. Dumbledore raged intensified, and with a wave of his sleeve, a wand was in his hands. He was to fire some spell, when Professor McGonagall's voice interrupted him. "What are you doing, Dumbledore?" Dumbledore came to a realization and stopped, but he still held his wand tightly in his hands. Professor McGonagall turned to Harry. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Potter?" Before Harry could answer, she turned towards Cedric. "Mr. Diggory, will you please call Madame Pomfrey in the chamber? I believe Mr. Snape is in need of medical care." although she herself did not make any effort to take Snape to the hospital wing. Cedric gave a nod and walked quickly towards the gate and then outside the room. She turned back towards Harry with an expression that said now is the time to answer. Every other eye in the room also was fixed on Harry. Chapter 74, Harry's Response, 2. October 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Being stared at by so many people would have made any ordinary person nervous, but Harry was by no means an ordinary person. He smiled. It seems you also have forgotten Professor McGonagall. What? Questioned McGonagall. I had warned very clearly to stay out of matters. I had made it very clear that if he disrespects me or my family one more time, I would show no mercy, said Harry with a smirk on his face and amusement in his eyes. He then put his both hands behind his back and said like a sage imparting wisdom, yet he paid no heed to what I said. Previously he fired a bone-breaking curse on M-Head and I let it go, only resorting to legal means. That was my last straw of patience. And this is my last straw of mercy, announced Harry with a determined face and like a judge passing a sentence. He may think of himself as a very great and powerful wizard, but for me he is nothing more than... Ah! What is the word he uses for the students? Yes. Dunderheads. He is nothing more than a dunderhead to me. So, the next time he pokes his nose in what is not his business or disrespects me and talk ill of me, he should be prepared to face me in a blood-foots duel, finished Harry in his calm but powerful voice. At this moment the door to room creaked open and Cedric Diggory walked in accompanied by Madame Pomfrey. Although Cedric had briefed her on the situation, she was still taken by surprise on seeing Snape, lying on the floor and groaning in pain. Quick on her feet she arrived near Snape and crouched next to him. I will put you in unconsciousness, she said. Carrying you in this condition will inflict tremendous pain on you. Snape gave a stiff nod in agreement and with a wave of Madame Pomfrey's wand, Snape went unconscious. She again waved her wand and he was levitated in air. Madame Pomfrey walked out of the room with a floating Snape following her. All this while no one spoke, and after Madame Pomfrey left the room, an awkward silence descended in the room. Igor Karkaroff broke the silence with his steel eyes still in place. What do we do now? Don't tell me Hogwarts will have 2 champions. Madame Maxime chimed in, yes, Dumbledore. What to do? Dumbledore did not speak and it was Bagman who answered the question with a half-nervous face, we have no other option. Everyone is bound by a magical contract and not participating means risking their magic. Harry internally scoffed at the foolishness of these people. To use such an artifact and such a binding contract in a simple tournament was the height of stupidity. Dumbledore still kept quiet and he was not paying attention to who was saying what, but he was lost in what Harry did today. He could see all his plans failing and he needed to find a certain method to get Harry back to be his follower. With this thought his face turned resolved and he spoke with authority, clearly, we have no other option and hence Harry Potter will have to participate in the tournament unless he wants to lose his magic. Igor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime were to speak something but Dumbledore continued, and to address your concerns, Hogwarts won't have 2 champions. Points of Mr. Diggory and Harry will be calculated separately as 2 different entities. Whoever has the highest points, his school will be declared the winner of the tournament, Dumbledore finished in a firm tone and with authority in his voice, leaving no further room of discussion. The emotions were about to settle down in the room but Harry interjected, are we really going to act like nothing happened? Who is going to talk about how my name came out of the goblet? Igor Karkaroff scoffed, don't act boy like you did nothing. What do you mean, Death Eater? Sneered Harry in a typical Malfoy expression. The room again turned heavy and heavy silence descended in the room which was broken by Karkaroff's roar, what did you say, you brat? Harry chuckled, ashamed of your identity now? Don't spout nonsense when you can't take one on yourself. Igor Karkaroff gritted his teeth in anger but considering the conditions like Harry's status as savior of Wizarding Britain, their presence on Harry's turf, his status of Lord Apparent of Potter family, etc., he did not act rashly. Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Mr. Potter? Asked McGonagall. No, answered Harry calmly. Did you ask an older student to put it into the Goblet of Fire for you? Said Professor McGonagall. No, again replied Harry. He could be lying, retorted Madame Maxime. Harry again felt his anger flaring but he held back his tongue. He could not have crossed the age line, said Professor McGonagall sharply. I am sure we are all agreed on that. Silence again hung in the room, which was broken by the loud clunk of footsteps of the newcomer, Alastor Moody. Binding magical contract, said Moody. Really convenient. Convenient. said Karkaroff, who was back to his normal self. I'm afraid I don't understand you, Moody. Don't you? Said Moody quietly. It's very simple, Karkaroff. Someone put Potter's name in that goblet knowing he'd have to compete if it came out. If anyone's got reason to complain, it's Potter, growled Moody, but... Funny thing. I don't hear him saying a word. Why should he complain? Burst out Fleur Delacour, stamping her foot. He has the chance to compete, hasn't he? We have all been hoping to be chosen for weeks and weeks. The honor for our schools. 1,000 galleons in prize money, this is a chance many would die for. You may have noticed Fleur and Maxime speaking in plain English while she had used broken English mixed with tidbits of French in the canon. I felt uncomfortable writing in that style, so please bear with it. Chapter 75, Harry's Response, 3. Harry again felt his irritation rising from Fleur Delacour. From the beginning, when Harry had arrived in the room, she had been acting like as if he did not even exist in the room. He wondered if she did not witness him sending a professor smashing into the wall. Where did all the arrogance came from to treat him like invisible air? He turned his face with a grin plastered over it towards Fleur. Seeing Harry's face, a chill ran down Fleur's spine and she gulped in fear. Honor? You say, Miss Delacour? Said Harry in extremely cold and steady voice. 1,000 galleons. He scoffed. I believe even before you arrived here in magical Britain, you must have heard and known my name, said Harry. After all, it's not very common for a child to vanquish Voldemort. Everyone except Dumbledore flinched at the name and Fleur nodded subconsciously in reply to Harry's question. And if you don't know, I am Lord Apparent Potter. I have so much gold that I can swim in it, and yet you say, 1,000 galleons. Chuckled Harry. Harry turned around and faced everyone present in the room. His heavy voice boomed in the room. I will make myself clear, one last time. He continued, I did not put my name or asked anyone to do so in the Goblet of Fire. And therefore, any accusation against me or any slander against me, and I will retaliate with force. I won't tolerate any kind of insult. His eyes turned cold, and in the dimly lit room it looked like two green blazing orbs. I also expect a detailed investigation, and not only for formality, into who put my name in the goblet. I hope DMLE will be called upon and the school does not put everything under table, said Harry with his eyes narrowing towards Dumbledore. And since, now that I am magically bound to compete, I will do so, finished Harry. At all this declaration, the atmosphere in the room turned extremely awkward and no spoke for some time. Well, shall we crack on, then? Said Ludo Bagman, diffusing the awkwardness, rubbing his hands together and smiling around the room. Got to give our champions their instructions, haven't we? Barty, want to do the honors? Mr. Crouch seemed to come out of a deep reverie in a state of shock. He arrived near the fireplace from where he was standing near the wall. The first task is designed to test your daring, he told Harry, Cedric, Fleur, and Victor, so we are not going to be telling you what it is. Courage in the face of the unknown is an important quality in a wizard, very important. The first task will take place on November the 24th, in front of the other students and the panel of judges. October 1994. Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. With a pop, Harry arrived in his room in the chamber. He had no visible reaction and looked calm, but from inside he was seething in anger. He had hoped that this would be a calm year for him and he could use the time of the Triwizard Tournament to accomplish his political goals and devise a method to get Sirius free of all charges. But now all his hopes were in drain. Harry need not be a genius to figure who would be the ultimate mastermind behind his name coming out of the goblet other than Voldemort. What he could not figure was, what Voldemort wanted to accomplish with this. After absorbing Voldemort's memories, Harry understood one thing very clearly, that Voldemort would not choose to kill him indirectly. Voldemort's ego would not allow him to do so. He would want to kill Harry with his own hands. This meant that at some point during the tournament, Voldemort would probably be making an appearance. Either he has rebuilt his body or is in the process of doing so, muttered Harry to himself. No matter whatever, this time Harry was going to be prepared for Voldemort. He needed to fast-track his actions. Before his confrontation with Voldemort, he needed to destroy all the Horcruxes and ultimately kill Voldemort for once and all. The other thought in Harry's mind was about Dumbledore. He wondered if the headmaster knew who was person responsible for putting his name in the goblet. He wondered if Dumbledore himself had some role to play in this. After all, in his first 2 years the old coot himself had paved the path for the confrontation between him and Voldemort. With various different thought going through his mind, Harry went to bed. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Next day, early in the morning, Harry was having his breakfast at the Gryffindor table. Dumbledore along with other heads of house including Severus Snape were present at the teachers' table. Snape tried to maintain a neutral expression on his face but failed miserably and was almost staring at Harry with burning eyes. What surprised Harry was the wide smile present on Dumbledore's face. The old coot looked as if he had gone senile and was smiling wildly. Very few students were present in the Great Hall and all of them were giving weird glances at Harry. The most noticeable among them were the Hufflepuff who were staring at him with all the hate they could muster. Only if they were brave enough, would they have fired some spells at him, wondered Harry. At this moment, a small commotion happened at the entrance of the Great Hall and a bunch of Gryffindors entered the hall. Walking in front of them was Ron Weasley and Harry's other 2 roommates, Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan. Here comes the House of Brave and Courageous, who charges in face of danger, sighed Harry in annoyance. Foolishly. Chapter 76, Dumbledore's Games. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The commotion caused by the bunch of the Gryffindors brought the attention of every pair of eyes in the Great Hall on them. Puffing up their chest in pride, Ron along with his fellow housemates marched towards Harry. He arrived and stood opposite Harry across the table with an irritating grin plastered over his face. He was probably waiting to draw Harry's focus but Harry continued eating his food. Ron turned a little red in embarrassment but he quickly recovered from it. Harry. Harry sighed, yes. Congratulations, said Ron. Another year at Hogwarts but you are still the student in limelight. Harry rubbed his temples in frustration. Look Ron, for the sake of the fact that I considered you as my first friend, I give you a fair warning. Don't irritate me and don't cross the line. Ron chuckled mustering all the disgust he could in his voice. Quite a nice actor you are, Harry. Acting all righteous now, hey. He lowered his voice but still it was easily visible to the entire Great Hall. Tell me, how did you do it? Used your invisibility cloak? Or, did you find some other method? Harry took a deep breath to calm himself down. How he wanted to fire a few spells at the idiot but he could not. After the previous incident with the Slytherin students and Amelia's warning, he understood that he needed to maintain a good image in the wizarding world. He turned towards the teacher's table. Professors, can you please ask this idiot to stop irritating me? McGonagall was about to open her mouth probably to reprimand Ron but Dumbledore beat her to it. I don't think Mr. Weasley is doing anything wrong, Harry. He is merely trying to congratulate you for the fact that you are now going to participate in such a prestigious department, he said with a wide smile and twinkles in his eyes. McGonagall said then, Mr. Weasley, please take your seat. If a fellow student does not want to interact with you, please refrain from doing so. Ron gave a last heated glance before he walked away and took his seat and started to stuff his mouth. Harry took another few minutes to complete his breakfast. He got up from his seat and walked towards the teacher's table. He stood face to face with Dumbledore and questioned, May I ask, have you been able to get any clue regarding who put my name in the goblet? Dumbledore smiled, we are doing our investigation, Harry. Harry understood that the old man was clearly putting the matter into the rug. He pressed, if you are not able to find anything, did you call for DMLE? I am sure they would have their methods to find out what have manipulated the goblet. Though Harry did not directly mention, he clearly indicated towards departments of the mysteries. He was sure that they share their methods to deal with such a case. Dumbledore grinned and said with an expression of triumph, I believe we have no need to call for DMLE. Before Harry could retort, Dumbledore continued, their 2 department heads of ministry, Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch, directly involved in the investigation. Additionally, Mr. Crouch was ex-DMLE head. So, they are more than sufficient to investigate. Harry understood the implication that, Dumbledore is not going to allow for a proper investigation. He let go of this matter and said, Headmaster, I would like if you make a formal announcement that I did not put my name in the goblet. I do not want the entire Hogwarts for hating me for something which I did not do. When Harry said this, from the corner of his eyes he caught Professor McGonagall shifting uncomfortably in her chair while Snape was grinning. We have not established this face, Harry, Dumbledore's voice brought Harry's attention back to the old coot. Every student was watching them with complete focus and in silence. Though they were speaking in low voices because of the silence, what Dumbledore said was clearly audible to the students, at least to those who were sitting near the teacher's table. Dumbledore continued, "We only have your words to prove your innocence. Till we conclude the investigation, we cannot make such an announcement." Harry nodded his head, "I see." Harry could very well understand what the Dumbledore was trying to do. He was trying to paint Harry as guilty by mentioning these things. He very well understood that Dumbledore was trying to malign his image and make every student of Hogwarts hate him. After all, this was not the first time Dumbledore would be doing this thing. In his second year, from the first attack of the basilisk, when Mrs. Norris, the cat, was petrified and Filch blamed him, Dumbledore played the same game. Despite clear evidence and alibi in form of Hermione and Ron, Dumbledore brought him for an interrogation, painting a suspect on him. For the entire year, the whole school considered him as heir of Slytherin and responsible for those attacks, but none of the professors took a stand and made it clear that he was not the person responsible for the attacks. They quietly watched as he was treated by the whole school as an outcast but did nothing. Harry was too naive at that time to understand Dumbledore's games, but not this time. At this moment, Harry could have very easily taken a magical oath to prove his innocence, but he wanted to see how would the students react. Maybe he would find out if he had someone who would trust him. He wanted to play Dumbledore's game. In his second year he was affected by the way the other students treated him. But currently, he did not give a damn about what they thought of him. "Hopefully, you conclude your investigation soon, Headmaster," said Harry with a grin and stepped back from the teacher's table. Chapter 77, Beginning of Harry's Counterattack. Note, Hellier friends, hopefully you are all enjoying my fanfiction. I am not aware of the reason, but my book has seen a sharp decline in the average views and other parameters. Therefore, it would be pleasant if you all could give some power stones, regularly comment and give some reviews to boost my rankings. Enjoy the chapter. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 3 days had gone by since the incident with Ron Weasley in the Great Hall. For the past 3 days Harry had been living as an outcast in Hogwarts. The entire school expect a few students looked at Harry in disdain or in hatred and with a slight fear in their eyes. Dumbledore's move by announcing to the entire school that it had still not been established that he was innocent had only added fuel to the fire. Every student now seemed to be convinced that Harry himself or had asked someone to put his name in the goblet of fire. Though everyone was filled with hatred against him, no one dared to speak to him on his face. The news that he had struck Severus Snape with magical spells and that the bat had broken many of his ribs had spread in whole Hogwarts. Once the detail of the event left Cedric Diggory's mouth, the Hogwarts rumor mill worked at full force. Added to the fact what he had done to those Slytherin students, no student dared to mess with him. It was early morning and Harry was having his breakfast at one end of the Gryffindor table. On the teacher's table, the professors too were indulged in their breakfast. Among those professors, Minerva McGonagall had an expression of slight worry on her face. She had been observing Harry for the past 3 days. Like the previous 3 years, he had been again dragged into another mess which could again put his life in danger. In the previous years, Harry had suffered everything in silence. But this year, he was a completely different person. He had retaliated against everything with full force and Minerva was worried about how Harry would be reacting to all this he was going through. He had not attended a single class in the past 3 days, and though the participants of the tournament were exempt from classes, she did not feel good about Harry skipping classes. She casted a side-eye glance at Dumbledore and Snape and sighed in frustration. She had observed how the other students of Hogwarts were behaving with Harry. She had suggested to Dumbledore that they should announce to the whole school about Harry's innocence, that he had not been the one responsible for his name coming out of the goblet. But to her anger and frustration, Dumbledore had completely shot down her suggestion. She was lost in her thoughts when an owl came fluttering in the Great Hall and dropped a letter at the teacher's table just in front of Dumbledore. Dumbledore had his usual grandfatherly demeanor and his classic smile plastered on the face. With the same smile and twinkle in his eyes, he opened the letter to read it. As Dumbledore began reading the letter, his expression started to change from that of amusement to frown and then finally to anger. With anger in his eyes, Dumbledore turned in Harry's direction to find Harry already looking in his direction with an expression of amusement and mockery in his eyes. Dumbledore clenched his fist in anger while raised his chin further up as if mocking Dumbledore. The change in expression on Dumbledore's face was caught was everyone in the Great Hall, and they wondered what was written in the letter. The duo contained their stare competition for some time, which was broken by the arrival of dozens of owls carrying mails of the students. A good majority of students received their own copy of the Daily Prophet on their tables. The front page of the newspaper was plastered with a glowing image of the Goblet of Fire. Above the image, in slightly bigger size and slightly more bold than normal, the headline read, "Harry Potter, the boy who lived, pressed charges against the organizers of Triwizard Tournament. In an extremely surprising event, Harry Potter had pressed charges against the organizers of Triwizard Tournament for putting his life in danger. As it had been reported in the previous editions that Triwizard had a surprising fourth participant in the form of Harry Potter. Till now it was being believed that Harry Potter had used some underhand method to get past the age line set up by Albus Dumbledore around the Goblet of Fire. The specific people who had been named in the charges are 1. Albus Dumbledore, Headmaster of Hogwarts, Chief Warlock of Wizengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizard. Ludo Bagman, Head of Department of Magical Games and Sports. Barty Crouch, Head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. DMLE head Amelia Bones had called for an emergency hearing of the case in the Wizengamot day after tomorrow. Here is excerpt from a short interview she gave to Out Reporter. Madam Bones, can you please describe the case in short detail? I received an urgent complaint from Lord, a parent of Potter family, Harry Potter, about his life being put in jeopardy. Upon discussion with him, he decided to press charges against the 3 people. Do you believe that any claims of Harry Potter hold substance? I believe this is something we have to investigate and then council will decide upon it. I should not comment on it for now. What steps have you taken as DMLE head in this direction? First of all, I have confiscated the Goblet of Fire. An expert team of senior Aurors would be investigating the goblet. It is really a matter of investigation. How come it gave 4 names when it was meant to only select 3 names? We also have 2 days before the hearing begins. In these 2 days, I myself will be holding investigation with Albus Dumbledore, Ludo Bagman, and Barty Crouch. Amelia Bones refused to talk any more details about the case. Read page 2 for the full interview. Read page 3 for full details of Harry Potter's name coming out of the Goblet of Fire. Read page 5 for different opinions of various experts about what direction the case could take. Chapter 78, Flashback start of Harry's plan. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The Great Hall was in complete silence for the first few minutes while the students were busy in reading the article of the newspaper. The moment the students finished the article, a wave of chaos erupted. Loud chattering erupted in the Great Hall and almost every pair of eyes traveled between Harry and Dumbledore. They could now make an easy guess what was in the letter that had caused the change in Dumbledore's expression. Even the other professors, especially Minerva, had expression of confusion on their faces. While everyone was busy trying to make sense of what they had read and what was happened, Harry could not help but think of the events which had finally led to this. Flashback. It was after the incident in the Great Hall during which Dumbledore had very intricately portrayed Harry as the culprit. It was at this point that Harry, who had remained completely passive, decided to turn active in his onslaught. He concluded that if he continued to remain passive, he will never be able to live the quiet life he wanted. He would need to take a more active approach and be aggressive. He needed to sort all the problems and obstructions in his life to live without worry and care freely. Harry was walking in Hogwarts corridor, thinking all these things while formulating an outline of his next plans when he saw 2 girls walking, one blonde and one black-haired. He quickly caught up to them, Miss Greengrass and Miss Davis. The 2 girls turned while Daphne greeted, Mr. Potter. Harry smiled, I believe both of you are doing well. Daphne smiled, we are doing well enough, Mr. Potter, but I also believe that you are not here to ask silly questions like these. Before Harry could answer, Daphne added with a sarcastic tone, and please don't start to again hate us just because my fellow Slytherins decide to do something stupid to you. Harry was taken aback slightly and he questioned with a slight intrigue, it seems you believe that I am not the one responsible for my name coming out of the goblet. Daphne and Tracy smirked, we are not that foolish, Mr. Potter. We could clearly tell that you were not one responsible for it. She added further, and I am very well versed in these games that Headmaster Dumbledore just played now. Harry nodded and Daphne continued, and while the whole Gryffindor is a house full of idiots and would have easily fallen for Dumbledore's games, and Hufflepuff hate you because of Cedric Diggory. A lot of Slytherins understand the truth, but since they hate you, they would never acknowledge you as innocent. And Ravenclaws care for nothing. They would act as the sheep following the whole crowd. Harry had a slight pondering over his face, it seems you have been thinking a lot about this. Daphne grinned heavily, tell me Mr. Potter, what did you wanted from me just now? Harry said, can you contact your father? I want to meet him and Madam Bones immediately. Daphne stared at him curiously, why would want an immediate meeting? You will hear later. Can you do it? Said Harry. Daphne nodded, I will contact him. I believe he will be able to contact Madame Bones, or I will contact to Susan. Harry acknowledged with a nod, okay. Inform me after dinner. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It was dinner time, and as expected, the hatred shown by the entire Hogwarts had doubled down. Harry had spent the entire day reading books in the Chamber of Secrets. Harry was having his dinner without any care in the world at one end of the Gryffindor table when he felt a presence near him. He turned to find Hermione taking seat next to him. After his name had come out from the Goblet of Fire, this was the first time he had seen her. Harry, where were you for the entire day? Asked Hermione with a frown on her face. She took a plate and started to serve her some food. He did not answer the question directly. What happened? Seeing Harry dodging the question, she sighed, you will have to compete in the tournament. Harry nodded in response. Though Harry did not feel any hostility from her, he wanted to see what her reaction would be. Do you have any idea who put your name in the goblet? Asked Hermione with narrowed eyes. This question took Harry by slight surprise. Though he knew that Hermione would believe him, but after the little stunt that Dumbledore pulled and given the worship and respect of authority Hermione had, doubts had begun to form in his mind. You believe that I did not put my name in the goblet? Asked Harry back. The black-haired witch stared at him as if looking at an idiot and said, of course. By your first reaction when your name was called out by Headmaster, I knew very well that you had no idea that such a thing is going to happen. Answer my question, said Hermione further. I don't know, said Harry. Without a proper investigation it is difficult to ascertain who put my name in it. He sighed in disappointment, and I don't see anyone caring a bit about finding about the truth. Not wanting to talk too much about it, Harry asked what he had in his mind. In the past month, other than classes, Harry had rarely seen Hermione. It was like she would disappear after the classes. Where are you keeping busy? Asked Harry. Hermione grinned, and an expression of genuine delight rarely seen on her face appeared on her face. Oh! Harry, it is a surprise. I want so much to tell you. The happiness on her face faded and worry edged on her face. Once you get out of this mess of a tournament, I will tell you. Deciding not push further, he simply nodded in agreement and indulged himself in the food. Chapter 79, Flashback Meeting Amelia Bones and Sinus Greengrass. November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After his dinner amid the hostile stares of the Hogwarts student, Harry stood up and walked towards the gate of the Great Hall. As soon as he came out of the Great Hall, he found out a blonde girl waiting for him. Mr. Potter, said Daphne Greengrass. Harry nodded, Miss Greengrass. I contacted my father, Mr. Potter. He is willing to hold the meeting with you along with Madame Bones. He had talked to Madame Bones and she had also agreed, said Daphne. Harry smiled pleasantly, very well. He asked further, where can we meet? Daphne replied, Madame Bones has agreed to act as host. The meeting will be held in Bones Manor. But how will you go there? I don't think Dumbledore will allow you to leave the school boundary. Maybe I can ask my father to help you. Added Daphne as an afterthought. Harry shook his head, that won't be needed. Just inform your father to ask Madame Bones to keep her Floo network active. Even though she had no idea where Harry would be using the Floo from, she did not pry and nodded her head in agreement. Good night, Miss Greengrass, greeted Harry. Good night, Mr. Potter, greeted back Daphne. November 1994. Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry stood in the chambers in regal clothing. His aura appeared to be of a great ruler. Winky, who had helped him to get ready, also had a prideful expression on her face, and she stared at Harry with her big eyes in awe. With a pop, Harry operated away from the chamber into the Diagon Alley near a public Floo network. At this moment he had his face covered with a simple hood of his cloak. Harry paid the required fees, picked up a handful of Floo powder and threw it in the fire and muttered, Bones Manor. He disappeared in green flames. November 1994. Bones Manor. With a flash of green light, Harry appeared in hall. The hall seemed luxurious enough, adorned with various kind of antiques and valuable items. The hall was brightly lit and gave a homely feeling to Harry. In the center of the hall was placed a sofa. A red-haired woman greeted Harry, Good morning, Mr. Potter. Welcome to Bones Manor. Harry nodded and greeted back, Good morning, Madame Bones. With a gesture from Amelia, Harry followed behind her toward the sofa. On the sofa was sitting a middle-aged man with blonde hairs. He had sharp eyes and sharp facial features of a typical aristocrat. The man stood up to welcome Harry. "Hello, Mr. Potter. It is a pleasure to finally meet you." Harry took the man's extended hand. "Hello, Lord Greengrass. The pleasure is mine." Amelia added, "Take a seat, Mr. Potter." Harry acknowledged Madame Bones with a nod and took his seat. Amelia Bones and Sinus Greengrass followed suit and they also took their respective seats. Amelia said, "Raleigh." With a pop, a house elf popped in the hall. "Prepare some refreshments," further instructed Madame Bones, and with another pop the house elf was gone. In less than few moments, the elf popped back again and the table between the sofa was filled with various delicacies and some non-alcoholic beverages. The elf popped out again. Harry did not hesitate and picked up one glass and took a sip from it. He took the lead in the conversation. "I believe Miss Greengrass and Miss Bones have must told you about the conversation we have had regarding the Great Alliance." Both Amelia and Sinus nodded in response while Sinus began, "Yes. They talked to us and about the dissatisfaction you had with them." He sighed, "But as they have already explained, things were quite complicated and we did not wish to put our family in more trouble." He continued in grave tone, "You may not know, but Dumbledore is a firm opposer to all these old traditions of ancient houses and family names. Associating with you and trying to talk about the alliance with you from our initiative may have painted a target on our back. At that time, we had no idea what your ideological thought process would be, so we were somewhat hopeful. But you were completely ignorant about our society and in full alignment with Dumbledore. We did not wish to endanger our family. I hope you can forgive us." Harry shook his head. "I will not say that. I fully agree with what option you chose, but I understand your predicament." Sinus wanted to say something but Harry cut him off. "But Mr. Greengrass, I am here not to talk about these things. My purpose here to visit you is different." Amelia was quiet till this time, asked, "Is it about the Triwizard Tournament?" Harry nodded, "Yes." He continued, "I want to formulate the alliance now. I had decided to finalize the agreement in the winter holidays, but I cannot wait till that time." Amelia replied, "Mr. Potter, till you attain majority you cannot formalize the alliance. Till that time, we can only form an informal alliance. But do not fret about the formalization. I can guess that you have some kind of plan regarding whatever happened during the selection of the champions of the Triwizard Tournament," Sinus added. "We will support whatever you have in mind. An informal agreement of our alliance would be sufficient." Harry looked at the duo with flickers of amusement in his eyes. He chuckled, "I am very well aware of these rules and the requirement that I must be a lord before we can formalize the agreement." Amelia and Sinus nodded, thinking that Harry trying is to explain that he only meant about an informal alliance. Harry continued, "But I think that, I did not say, I am not a lord." Both of them could not understand immediately what Harry meant and were about to ask when Harry raised his right hand and a ring flashed in his index finger. Amelia and Sinus were taken by surprise and Amelia muttered, "Potter Lordship." "You are already Lord Potter," Sinus stated the obvious. Chapter 80, Flashback. Harry's intention for the Wizarding Society. November 1994. Bones Manor. The revelation of Harry being Lord Potter put Sinus Greengrass and Amelia Bones in a state of surprise and shock. They had still not come to acceptance of the reality when the ring on Harry's index finger changed and another ring took its place. "Black family ring," Sinus Greengrass almost screamed in shock. The ring again changed and a now ring with a lion carved on a gemstone took its place. "Gryffindor ring," said Amelia in state of shock, but unlike Sinus her eyes were dull and her face expressionless as if she was questioning reality itself. Harry continued his act and another ring appeared on his finger. The coiling serpent carved on a shiny black stone. Amelia said in her same dull tone, "Slytherin ring." Sinus next to him was completely in a state of shock. He had his eyes wide open and mouth open to half. The ring again changed and the fabled logo of the Deathly Hallows carved on a red bloodstone took its place. Amelia and Sinus lost whatever little control they had left and they both stood up in deep shock and screamed simultaneously at the top of their lungs, "Peveril ring!" It took few minutes for Amelia and Sinus take control on their nerves and emotions, during which Harry sat calmly on the sofa watching their shocked expressions with eyes full of amusement. Getting back in normal state, both of them took their seats, while Sinus spoke, "What kind of trick is this, Mr. Potter?" Harry chuckled, "Not believing what you see? Trust your eyes, Lord Greengrass." "Are you saying that all these rings are real?" asked Amelia with a deep frown and uncertainty etched on her face. "100%, without any doubt," said Harry with a smile on his face. Amelia took a deep breath. Do you understand what it implies? If it goes out, how everyone will react? Harry was about to answer, but Sinus could not hold his curiosity and he interrupted. And if all those rings were real, how did you get 5 lordship? Did you find them on a vegetable stall? Though asking something like this was not something good, curiosity got better of Sinus. Though Amelia would have not herself asked the question, she looked at Harry, wondering if he would answer. I believe that is not important, Lord Greengrass. I have these 5 lordship and the powers associated with it is all that matter, Harry refused politely with a smile. Understanding he had pushed his limits in haste, Sinus gave a stiff nod. Amelia broke the slight awkwardness that was building up. Now, the plan is that we formalize our alliance. Harry nodded, yes. Though I admit that to proceed in haste is due to my own selfish interest, my intention regarding the alliance is not short-term. Initially, when I decided to revive the alliance, it was because I wanted to revamp the Wizarding Society. Our wizarding world have completely turned rotten with a very bleak future. Amelia and Sinus very intently what Harry was saying. Harry continued, on one side we show that we are being progressive by thrashing old family traditions and narrowing down the scope of magic. A newly arriving Muggle-born or Muggle-raised wizard or witch is not given even basic information about our society. They are made to believe that they live in some kind of utopia. We think that we have eliminated evil and the wizard and witches have turned so soft they hardly know any battle-related spells if they are not aurors. While on the other hand discrimination and derogatory treatment because of one's blood status remains rampant. Use of slurs like mudblood is without any consequence on Hogwarts ground. Students like Malfoy get away with any kind of action because of his blood status. Even top graduate like Penelope Clearwater have to work as waitress as she confronted Malfoy of his behavior. An incompetent professor like Snape demeans all his students except Slytherins whom he protects for anything. A Death Eater like him become a Hogwarts professor because he was protected by Leader of Light Dumbledore. Another Death Eater like Lucius Malfoy gets away with all his crimes because he feigned Imperious Curse and now has the Minister of Magic in his pockets. Another Death Eater Igor Karkaroff trades some information and is allowed to leave the country only to return back as headmaster of another magical school. We have made a mockery of every system present in our wizarding world. He said in firm tone, my aim to build a better wizarding society. A society where we hold a fine balance between our original traditions and modernism. A society where the magic and magical potential is valued and not the blood. Harry finished his little speech while Amelia and Sinus looked at him in new light and looked at each other. Sinus or the Greengrass family which leaned heavily towards the protection and continuation of the old traditions while the Bones family or Amelia leaned more towards the progression and changes in the society. They understood that just as they were able to maintain a balance between themselves, a similar kind of balance was needed in the society. It was true as Harry described that the Wizarding Society had turned rotten and had a bleak future. I believe that with all the votes you now wield combined with our influence, we could easily obtain majority in Wizengamot, said Sinus. He added further, I think we must now discuss the terms of the alliance so that we can formalize it and then proceed forwards with regards to Lord Potter's plan about the mess that had been made of the Triwizard Tournament. Amelia and Harry nodded in agreement.
Thanks for listening.